Oh, welcome to the Reality OS. I'm Peter Duke, and Tracy Connors and I are joined today by the famous and omnipresent George Webb. How you doing, George?
Great, Peter. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, George.
George,
Nice to see you in the studio.
you've got some serious production value going today, George.
They've cleaned me up, so I'm better now.
Well, what I really like about this setup that you've got is that we can really take advantage of your mellifluous voice.
Oh yes. I've just before we start the show, it's okay. I learned what a fricative was. You guys know what a fricative is?
What the frick is a fricative, George?
A fricative is sounds that you make with a tight lip with air escaping. So shh is a fricative, but also is a fricative. So if you suppress your fricatives, the My Fair Lady in Hartford, Hereford, and Hampshire, hurricanes hardly ever happen. If you suppress your fricatives, it's Hartford, Hereford, and Hampshire, hurricanes hardly ever happen. And it's easy to affect a British accent if you do that. Isn't that a nice tip?
It is. So what's that called? What are you doing to the fricative again?
You're suppressing it. So
you're a suppressed fricative.
And a plosive is a p sound. So you also, if you're a good, proper British accent, you suppress your plosives. You don't go plosive. You go plosive.
Well, then you don't need a pop filter, which none of the three of us are using today.
Correct.
Which is that little thing that looks like a screen.
Microphone afro.
It's a microphone afro, yeah.
They make one now that's this big that some people are using. It looks ridiculous.
Oh, you're talking about the foam?
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about.
I think we've expanded it to actually encompass the pop as well, because you couldn't put.
Well, I have. I mean, like
yeah. That's
right. Well, that's the one that you use when you're on the road. But if you're in the studio, then you can. It's called a pop filter, and it looks like a little disc, and it gets attached to the mic stand. Anyway, so George, Fauci, Wuhan. Last week we had Rand Paul asking Fauci about it, and it became big news all over the world that the Wuhan virology lab was working with the NIAID and Fauci, and he had financed $4.5 million or something like that to do gain of function. And I was sitting there watching Rand Paul talk about that on TV, and I was thinking, gee whiz, I've heard this before. Where did I hear it? Was it George talking to Paul Cottrell about it and taking it all the way from the PO down to the ACE2 receptor level? It seemed like deja vu all over again.
Well, obviously, we didn't have enough to do with our time. but the good news is, yes, if you look at the patents, or should I say patents, look at the patents. It's quite simple.
Are you suppressing your fricative?
I'm trying to implode my plosives. If you implode your plosives. So it was just a simple matter of looking at the patents. And the patents tell you the story because they patent stuff before they release stuff. It's sort of like getting the copyright on a movie before releasing a movie. And so if you just look at the patents, you can see that there were things in there that there weren't before. The thing that Cottrell nailed was this paper out of India, which had these 5 inserts from HIV. So never before it appeared. And all of a sudden they were in there, sort of like Shirley Temple showing up in a movie in 2021. You think, wait a minute, she's dead. So, and she sings 5 different numbers in the show. So literally you had 5 different inserts that never were there before.
So this is inserts that were put into the virus that was already patented that weren't part of the patent?
Yeah, the patent's a little bit different, but the actual sequences were in there. And then there were also 4 patents by Fauci for a protein that is the actual protein that does the linking from the ACE receptor, like Peter said, to the spike protein, which was GP120. And there was 4 patents, glycoprotein 120. So was two big clues that gain of function happened.
And what made you look in that direction to begin with? Because this is, what time frame are you digging into this stuff?
March 2020, and the reason why I got into it was Paul Cottrell was doing a series of kind of roundtables with about 5 or 6 other people, Kevin McCarran and different folks. And Eddie Ads actually was calling all these people and kind of doing these roundtables. And so I heard Paul say this, the 5 inserts, which is a very Fauci-like signature. And I said, oh, that needs more investigation. So it's really Paul who had kind of the inside track.
Sounds like it sounds like a 50s band named Fauci and the 5 Inserts.
There actually is something called a bilabial fricative, Peter. So that band reminds me of that.
Bilabial. Okay, I'm not going to go there.
Correct. I'm just
It
saying.
means lips.
That's all it means.
Okay, we've got bilabial fricatives and pumping. What were the
plosive peas?
Plosive, yeah, not to be confused with Nancy Plosive peas.
Right.
No.
In hearing all of that and remembering you and Paul, and I was quite impressed, George, at your ability to go dig deep down into molecular biology on a molecular level, which I was a skill set. Scott Adams would call that a skill stack. I didn't realize that was part of your stack, but I knew that you go down to the electron level in electronics, but I didn't realize that you went down to the ACE2 receptor level with molecular biology. So I was quite impressed about your ability to just kind of have a casual conversation about that with Paul Cottrell. How did you get that knowledge? Where did that come from?
Growing doctors is hard. So growing doctors, but once you grow a doctor, the next doctor is easy. So,
okay.
Yeah. There you go.
So it's your medical relations.
Yeah, and I think we all have an ability to understand this stuff if it's put in simple enough terms.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I always was trying to do because I didn't do that well in science in high school. I was always looking for analogies, and sales is a lot like that, and sales engineering is a lot like that. So I had done that kind of prep work before, just like binding affinity, mostly binding affinity. It's sort of like dentine or octane in your fuel. You don't necessarily know what binding affinity is, but if you go out on a date and you're very attracted to the other person, then everybody knows what binding affinity is. So that's what you need in molecules, just like you need in drive-in movies.
All right. Well, can we jump back for a second? Because we kind of jump cut to, okay, you guys are dissecting what's going on with the actual virus and looking at the 5, strands that made their way in. How early on did you realize that the official story was not correct? That this was just some sudden, new illness that broke out in Wuhan?
Well, this happened. We had a big meeting on the Potomac in a big beach house, and there was like 15 people there. We were doing research there, and that's where a White House reporter, who I don't know if you've met or not, from a Japanese television station, came in and said, "Hey, do you realize that the this novel new thing, the Chinese foreign minister is blaming." The spokesman is blaming the U.S. athletes that went to Wuhan for the outbreak of this thing.
And this was at the White House?
This was at the beach house there in Cobb Island.
Oh, okay. So it was a Japanese. Was I there?
You were there. Oh no, you were dialing in. You were the.
That was right when COVID happened. I was on my way to the airport and I couldn't get on a plane because Garcetti canceled my flight.
But Peter led the thing, and we created this video that did 650,000 views in a half a day,
and then disappeared.
But
right.
That was when.
So they have a foreign minister blaming us for this in February of 2020.
Yeah, and it was after this foreign minister spokesman named Lijian, Lijian. It was after he saw Dr. Redfield of the CDC testifying about mysterious illnesses, pneumonia-like illnesses in August of 2018. And these are deaths. These result in deaths. So the follow-up question from the senator was, well, you're the CDC. You investigate new novel deaths with autopsies. Did you perform the autopsies? And Redfield said, no. So that was the first, that's what caused Lijian, the foreign minister spokesman's head to explode. Was like, you sent all your athletes over here from one of the forts that had these mysterious deaths 2 months after.
Which fort was that?
Fort Belvoir, and then also Fort Detrick, and there's a couple of other forts.
And those forts specialize in what?
Different things in the Army.
Yeah.
Fort Detrick is factory to foxhole. So everything the warfighter needs, from boots and all, especially food and drugs, morphine for the medics, that type of thing.
That whole facility was built to be our chemical and biological weapons lab during the World War II, correct? Fort Detrick? It wasn't even a fort before that?
Fort Detrick is where the development, correct. They used an old Army base, but Fort Detrick is where the development occurs. For the deployment, the Defense Logistics Agency at Fort Belvoir performs that function. They're about 60 miles away from each other, but they work hand in hand because nothing gets deployed without Fort Belvoir saying it does. So you can dream up all the things you want at Fort Detrick, sort of like Q and the old James Bond. You have all the gadgets, but then it's the intelligence guys that decide to deploy it.
Intelligence or operations? What does Belvoir specialize in?
There's a couple of different commands there. So the command for logistics, moving things around the world, so drugs and food and drugs. It's also got DTRA, which is the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and they're in charge of moving all biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons around the world. That's their command. So it's called the Intelligence Command. The head of all Army intelligence, military intelligence, is INSCOM, and that's also at Fort Belvoir. And the special forces that deploy these things are also at Fort Belvoir, and that's called Task Force Orange. Task Force Orange. So there's a lot of commands there at Fort Belvoir, and that's what makes the story really a Fort Belvoir story.
Right, and the DTRA has, you've talked about that before. I don't want to go too much off on a sidebar, but at one point, wasn't the DTRA kind of after 9/11 a way to, kind of create fusion centers between the military and the FBI and the CIA? Isn't that part of the DTRA?
Yeah, exactly. The DTRA is all about reducing terrorism, and terrorists can be overseas, and then they can bring weapons in the United States, and that's why Special Forces works with the FBI through the DTRA to track all this stuff. So somebody's mixing something in Aleppo, which is something bad, then they put it on a ship and it's heading toward, America. That is the stuff of DTRA and the FBI working together through that command at Fort Belvoir.
So what happens is in 2019, Redfield goes before the Senate and testifies that there's some new pneumonia.
Yes.
It's outbroken, and it's hit these Detrick and Belvoir.
Yes.
Right?
He doesn't say all the sites, but there's about 8 Army sites.
And then how do we get from Detrick and Belvoir to China?
Well, we get to, because a whole bunch of athletes that are U.S. military athletes get on a plane, I believe, at Andrews Air Force Base near Fort Belvoir, Belvoir, and they all fly to Wuhan.
Oh.
And that is in October 2019. And the day of the opening ceremonies in 2019 is also the day you may be familiar with Bill Gates of the Gates Foundation launches Event 201, What If a Pandemic Happened? And also Klaus Schwab, your favorite and my favorite international man of, evil. He also sponsors the event at the World Economic Forum. So the exact same day that these two guys launched this pandemic simulation is the same day that we think the super spreader event happens at these NATO Wuhan military games in Wuhan.
And now, did any of the American athletes that were
And
there
wasn't
get
that
sick
well,
while they were there?
Did any of the American
we have
athletes?
to be very careful here.
Sure. And Peter, I think
We have
you're
to be
on
very careful here because George,
You're way lagged behind us.
I'm on a what?
A
Okay, so
delay.
I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and then I will duck off and then duck back on to try to resync my audio. But we have to be very careful here because part of the reason that George got his entire channel deleted was because he has a hypothesis about specific people that
Sure.
could have potentially been patient zero. And so we can't really talk about that directly. But
We can
I
avoid
will,
names, right?
yes, I will pop off and then pop back on.
Okay.
Okay, well,
All right, get us thrown off, George.
I won't say any names, but I will say about a third of many of the teams got sick. And I will say that the infirmary ran out of medicine in Wuhan during the games. So the State Department has made some comments about, yes, some people may have gotten sick on the plane or at the airport on the way out, but that doesn't jive with the evidence. The infirmary ran out of medicine. The French athlete, who is the pentathlon woman who won the world championship in the gold medal, Elodie Claudel, says she was infected with COVID, and her husband also. And she was on the French team. So the Canadian team talked about a third of their people being in quarantine in the back. The Italian team talked about being sick. There was, I think, 100 different teams there. A lot of different people have said that they came down ill with this strange pneumonia. So when you look back at these things, you have to say, what's the kind of big super spreader event? There is one other potential super spreader event that the FIBA basketball championships were even bigger. There was 300,000 people at the Wuhan NATO games, military games, but the basketball was even bigger, maybe 500,000. It was about a month before. But these are the two big events that epidemiologists are looking at for the big spread of the virus.
And isn't that also the conceit of a novel that was written? That there was a novel, and maybe the people in the chat room can help us out if I can't remember the name of it. But it wasn't Tom Clancy, but it was somebody who writes those military kind of thriller. I'm thinking of Tom Clancy because Rainbow Six kind of has a similar conceit. But I thought that there was a novel that actually came out, and there were actual military games in Wuhan or something like that, and that was the super spreader event in the novel.
I know at about the same time in October, there was a movie that starred Gwyneth Paltrow, and she gets sick in some place from the bat being eaten by a pig, and then the pig being served in China at some kind of wet market. So I'm not sure if that was Contagion or another a movie about that same time.
Yeah, somebody says Crimson Contagion.
I think there is a Tom Clancy also that kind of deals with this as well.
I just remembered like when at the beginning of the COVID-19 thing that there was a spy thriller that had a very similar conceit. And this all kind of, without trying to go too far afield, it's like it starts to I don't think it was the hot zone. There was, it all kind of feeds into this predictive programming thing. It seems weird, but we've talked about H.G. Wells, on different shows before about predictive programming and the Invisible Man, and which is a story about a community that's terrified by something that it can't see, and War of the Worlds, which is a story about how humanity is cowed by Martians and only saved by a virus. Both of those things that were over 100 years old as far as the stories were concerned were in theatrical release in the beginning of 2020. One of them came out in December of 2019. The other one came out in February 2020. We all know how long it takes to get a movie or a TV show into production. So the fact that these things are just kind of accidentally on television in the movie theaters when that happens seems to be quite startling to me.
Yeah. Tracy's more in the movie business, so I'll let her comment on that.
Yeah, well, I just thought too, Peter, it's almost the same plot line except without the death toll of Stephen King's The Stand, which I think they just remade and released. And then this World War Z. It turns people into zombies, and it starts in China.
Right. Well, let's hope the vaccine doesn't turn people into zombies.
Well, people have become zombies. Go outside.
Good point.
So it's not the flesh-eating zombies, but not yet, at least.
I saw someone mention the hot zone, and that is, I think, takes place in Virginia and near Reston, Virginia. And we actually have a person in our chat that grew up in Reston and remembered the outbreak that actually happened. There was a virus that was released there in the 70s, I want to say. And so that book is based on true events, but then they take artistic license.
Sure. Well, the point is lab leaks have happened before.
If you listen to the guy who's currently running HHS, they happen all the time. Gottlieb, he shares a name with the poisoner in chief from the Frank Olson days in the 50s. But Gottlieb says that lab leaks happen all the time. Remember, a year ago, it was conspiracy theory that or 16 months ago, that lab leaks happen. Now they happen all the time.
I found it.
Yeah.
Dean Coons, 1981 thriller about a deadly virus from Wuhan, tops bestseller 39 years.
Wow.
Well, there's a good reason for that being 39 years ago, and that will be the stuff of our second half. I don't want to rush you, but that's the George Hodel story.
And 39 is 3 times 13, which is some kind of sacred thing going on there too, right?
And all I know is that means triskaidekaphobia times 3.
Come on, let's not talk about Jason Goodman today.
I'm just saying, technography or steganography is a part of some people's minds. You have to account for it.
Yeah, I can't not see it now. That's the problem. So
there was a movie called The 39 Steps, which I thought was fascinating. I thought it was going to have this fascinating end. It's a war thriller. I think it was one of those Claude Rains movies.
It was Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, and it ended at a stairway that went to nowhere. Why so anticlimactic of an end?
So Tracy, did you want to keep George going on his timeline?
Well, it seemed like there was a good transition over to Hodel.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's transition then.
Well, I'm sorry, Peter. I left you hanging there with that allusion to 39 Steps. But if you go back 75 years, the Hodel story is very interesting. We had Steve Hodel, the son of George Hodel, come down to San Diego for our little 7 or 8 day get together with some of the citizen journalists that were in San Diego. And he has this theory that his father was involved in all these murders because he's a sex fiend, sort of. And the murders are the Black Dahlia murders in Los Angeles, the Zodiac murders in San Francisco, and the lipstick murders in Chicago. But he doesn't really put a lot of attention on a book that George Hodel wrote called The China Letter. And can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The China Letter is a dispatch that George Hodel wrote from Wuhan. It was actually 3 different cities. The city kind of trifurcated the 3 cities around the Yangtze there, and I think it's the Yellow River. And now it's all one big city, the Wuhan. But that's where he made the dispatch from. And what he created was a drug rat line to Los Angeles and San Francisco from Wuhan, flying with the flying tigers over this mountain in these Himalayas to create this new automated plane or flying tiger network. And what went in to Wuhan was the vaccine business. Vaccines were being flown in. And as you unwind this story, it becomes fascinating because you can see that this is sort of a symbiotic relationship between drugs and bioweapons. The drugs that you bring in are kind of raw, and they're just money into Compton and places like that. And then the ones you send in have been kind of sort of the old colonial model, have added value now. Now you're sending them back in and getting paid more money for the drugs going the other way.
And this is kind of a reoccurring theme. When I first started watching you, it was difficult for me to comprehend or get my arms around how quickly you would assess things and figure out how things were happening. And there were 2 things that you used to say. You used to say it's all. He said you just have to look at the. You used to just say you just need to look at the metadata. And then the second thing that you said is that these people aren't clever. They keep doing the same things over and over again. And as I started to read, Tragedy and Hope 101 or Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare or Secret Team or any of the Operation Gladio, you start to read these books and you start to see the same patterns, the way that things are constructed happening over and over and over again. And once I had read enough books, I started to understand, George is just applying the logic that was taken from this operation and then kind of mapping it onto this and seeing how these things overlap. And that seems to be a pretty good way of doing things. Is that what do I have that correct, George?
Yeah. In the case of Wuhan, for instance, Alan Dulles, who was the head of the UN Relief Commission after the war, set up a UN Relief Commission in Wuhan. And then the person he named was George Hodel, military doctor George Hodel, to become a general in Chiang Kai-shek's army, that was the kind of home base of the Nationalist Chinese Army. A civil war was almost beginning right then and there, and drugs was the way to finance that army. So you can see that it goes right from OSS straight into the CIA, drugs in one direction, weapons in the other. This is going to be Chiang Kai-shek and our kind of drug connection to Chiang Kai-shek. And that is over and over and over. That's Iran-Contra, that's Libya, Syria, you name the conflict, Guatemala, Venezuela. It's always seems to be drugs coming into the United States to pay for the weapons going in the other direction.
And how was Hodel already under suspicion for other things when he gets shipped off on this mission and tapped by Dulles?
No, he's this is a very blue ribbon big rescue mission by the UN. This is like being named. I mean, this is right about the time, Good Earth, Pearl Bucket, sure, written all that. So this is like a very prestigious mission. It's sort of like the High Commissioner for Bosnia or Kosovo after the war to pick up the pieces.
I guess my understanding with Hodel was that he was like the abortionist when this was illegal in the 30s and 40s for LAPD, high-powered lawyers, Hollywood set, all that. So I was wondering if he was already known in those crowds, and that's why Dulles tapped him to go.
I don't believe that to be the case. If you look at again, this is just from the presentation and reading the book that Steve Hodel gave us. But pre-war, he was known as this genius. He had grown up in Pasadena in the kind of Jack Parsons shadow of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory there. He had been schooled. The Montessori school had just started in Paris. He was one of the first graduates of that. He had been picked out as one of Terman's 50 most gifted students in California growing up. His IQ was rated at 187, 1 point higher than Einstein, was what Steve said. He has studied engineering at Caltech. He was being groomed for being sort of this, rocket scientist before he decided to then study medicine. Very accomplished surgeon. Rachmaninoff was family friend. Sort of all these white Russians kind of coming and going from Ukraine. His parents were both Ukrainian professors. So this sort of turn that they take with the story, with him being the abortion doctor and all that, really isn't supported by, as Peter mentions here, the metadata. It's not. What is supported is sort of a Kissinger kindergarten type grooming that this guy for great things. So he gets involved after the war with a couple of characters running a intelligence operation at a Frank Lloyd Wright house, only it's Frank Lloyd Wright's son, so it's a Lloyd Wright house. It's a $10 million house between West Hollywood and Beverly Hills. So this is the hoi polloi of Hollywood entertaining here. That's the house they're
is
living
that
in.
is that the house that you showed me the picture of?
Yeah, it's got a
yeah,
sort of an Italian.
It's what Frank Lloyd Wright, I think, called textile bricks. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that it's the same. I think the house is owned by Joel Silver now, and it was used in the movie Blade Runner.
Yeah, it's got a colonnade. It's got a colonnade around it, sort of like right out of the most decadent days of the Roman Empire, and the pool and the Hollywood parties and
right.
Jack Parsons was frequenting this place, which meant that you had every kind of burlesque outfit that you can think of, with every kind of crazy circus, and people wearing animal hats and all this bacchanalian kind of goings on. And then John Huston was the key guy supposedly running the intelligence operation, because this is all to get people, sort of a Jeff Epstein kind of compromise operation, to get people to do something silly on film. And then, everything was, Hodel mentioned this, everything is being filmed and recorded by the FBI. So that is the grounding before you ever get to the abortion clinic and before you ever get to the Black Dahlia. He goes into an intelligence operation. Dulles moves him from Wuhan doing the vaccine drug thing and moves him into Hollywood doing this compromise operation.
And so the abortion clinic was part of the compromise operation?
Yeah, well, yes. And we believe that he had many women coming in, like the Black Dahlia. If you're not familiar with the Black Dahlia, for folks who are not familiar with the murder, it's this one young woman named Elizabeth Short, who had sort of these smoky, coal black eyes that seemed to, be alluring and put, the Hollywood elite under their spell. And Howard Hughes and other oil magnates seem to be involved. Howard Hughes having the studio. Can't remember which studio he had right now. It wasn't RKO, but it was another one that they did, Hell's Angels, a couple of other movies. But Bob Mayhew and George Bush end up coming to Hollywood at this time, and George Bush actually lives in Compton. So there's a whole underworld characters in oil and weapons and compromise starting to filter into Southern Hollywood after World War II. And the abortion clinic, if you will, is where she goes. Potentially, they're getting these women pregnant, and then Bob Mayhew is then extorting money from Howard Hughes to pay. This is just one of the clients, but to pay for the abortion, also pay for their medical if they got a VD. Hodel had 2 VD clinics, one in San Francisco and one in Los Angeles, in Chinatown, in both towns. So Ava Gardner is one of the people that ends up, Howard Hughes paying payola and Mayhew being kind of intermediary.
And a lot of people watching this may not realize that back then that there was a stigma attached to abortion and venereal disease. It was potentially a life ruining kind of event that if you were associated with it, it moved you into a tier of society you didn't want to be in, right?
Right. And so I do think he did perform abortions like Steve says he did. And I do believe that at some point these women would start talking about being used in these parties in such a way, sort of like Eyes Wide Shut, if you know the doctor that begins the movie, Tom Cruise's character, where he's trying to wake the girl up after she's been drugged. That's sort of the role. That's sort of the role that I think George Hodel played at these parties. And so it's Steve, being an ex-LA PD cop, he's all about the forensic evidence that's actually on site.
This is Steve Hodel?
Yeah, Steve Hodel, the son. Is
the son. So he's kind of uncovering this secret life of his father.
Yes. But
and
he
was a detective.
Yes, with the LAPD for 30-odd years. But he's not looking really at the intelligence connections. And a lot of our group of our people asked him about this. And he was like, well, no. I'm like, well, it kind of makes sense if you were trying to... Bob Mayhew, for instance, was working with the FBI, bringing in these paperclip Nazis. If you wanted to take over all the oil fields, which Beverly Hills is basically sitting on an oil field, if you wanted to take over all the oil fields and compromise all the people owning the oil, you would do a compromise operation. I mean, that's the first page of the Nazi handbook, right? And it just so happens Bob Mayhew shows up, and the compromise house shows up, and George Hodel, the OSS guy for Dulles, shows up. George Bush shows up, and so this is the book.
Is this the part that they left out of the movie L.A. Confidential? In the Godfather movies, they left the CIA, the Masons, and the Vatican out of the story, and in L.A. Confidential, they've left the Bushes, the Hodels, and the Mayhews out of the story.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think all of these things, there's a series on now called I Am the Night, which talks about and actually shows the house, I think, and shows the Hodel art collection. And see, the Nazis had a lot of artwork, hot artwork, that they used to broker because you can't really use money. They had some gold from taking over the various treasuries of the countries they conquered. So we have Bob Mueller, not Bob Mueller, but one of the Muellers from in the paperclip giving Harry Truman a painting every time he goes over and plays the piano.
So those are the original non-fungible tokens, right?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Peter Duke can get you, what is it? Monetized, your social worth monetized?
Oh no, that's Ali. That was another show. The Bit Clout.
There you go.
That's right. Yeah,
So-
you haven't been kicked off that platform yet, George.
I didn't even know I was on it yet.
Yeah.
You should. So, George, how does the intelligence ties to Hodel play out with him going to the Philippines? So he goes to China for a little bit, comes back, he's in LA for a while, and then suspicion starts to mount. Is that correct? With the murders that are taking place and how precision cut they are, and his weird art fetishes. And I don't know when they put that together that he was actually, whoever laid out the Black Dahlia mimicked a painting by a surrealist artist that George was very interested in and a patron of. So how does he get to was there an intelligence tied to the Philippines work that he did?
Absolutely. So, so goes Chiang Kai-shek, so goes George Hodel. George Hodel is the other side of the drug business that Chiang Kai-shek has with the Chinese nationalists. So there's a period of civil war from 1945 to 1949 with the communists. And the Wuhan is the center of the Generalissimo, Chiang Kai-shek. And they take over bioweapons that had been left there by the Japanese, called Unit 731. So this is where Wuhan becomes the new bioweapons capital for Chiang Kai-shek. Now, what happens with Mao, as we all know, is he takes over with the peasant army and he takes control, and Chiang Kai-shek has to go in 1949 to Taiwan in refuge. And then Madam Shek does her, worldwide PR, Jackie Kennedy type tours. Well, a lot of the people that were growers, for the Hmong tribe and other tribes, were then transported to the Philippines. The Philippines became the new kind of locus for this drug trafficking. Not that they didn't keep the Chinese going, because Mao said, okay, you can continue with the drugs as long as you're export only. We don't want anybody in China consuming the drugs anymore. So he was kind of flipping the tables on the old opium den strategy that the British East India Company had. So Hodel is still, this is again the part that Steve doesn't want to, move into his calculus for whatever reason. But the intelligence connections, as you quite rightly point out, Tracy, are there when he goes to the Philippines.
Interesting. And so why would they recall him from there?
Well, these are setting up. It's sort of like,
he's an advanced team of sorts.
Yeah. Okay. Like, the boat's going to go there. It's going to be called the American, Coffee Can Company. You're going to wear the, coffee can outfit. You're going to grind coffee can grounds on your hands before you go, so you smell of coffee, but that throws the dogs off. But your job's to ship the drugs. And if you go to China, Philippines today, you'll see that there's a lot of this drug traffic still. Blackwater is our current contractor that manages this, so it hasn't gone away.
What's that smile, Tracy?
They just keep playing the same game over and over again.
Yeah, like I said, I was trying to figure out how George figures things out so quickly, and if you, what was your gateway into this? Like, what was the first book that you read, George, on kind of alternate history or revisionist history that made you start thinking that things weren't exactly the way they were? Or was it your relationship with your father and all of the stuff that went on with the cell phone?
No. The first book that I read, I didn't think any of this stuff. I mean, my brother told me about the Clinton Chronicles, and I finally met Pat Matriciano in front of the Mike Flynn trial in D.C. That was the first book I had ever heard about Mina Airport and Waco as the secondary landing strip, if Mina's clouded over and all that stuff. I'd never heard of any of this, Ollie North and Iran-Contra. I guess that would be the first one that I was given, some indication with Ollie North and Iran-Contra. But the first book that really went into it was Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot. And that still, I think, is the best book ever written about intelligence. There's been other ones that have been introduced to me by John O'Loughlin, like Secret Team and, the brothers, Stephen Kinzer. There's a lot of books out there that go into this whole thing. The Mormon Brotherhood by Jim Marrs wrote the the Fourth Reich, the rise of the Fourth Reich. There's a lot of good books, but the Devil's Chessboard, I think, is still the best if somebody wants to get started.
Yeah, I like to ask people that question because Richard Grove and Jay Dyer were talking about their entry into it, and their entry was both James Bond. One of them read Ian Fleming's biography, and the other one read the Man Called Intrepid, and that kind of led them down that road of seeing. I think we've lost him.
No, I think he
Sorry.
dropped one.
I was not plugged in. I saw a battery warning.
Okay.
But A Man Called Intrepid, I think, is another great book to get started.
Yeah, I had mentioned a few weeks ago that there was this what I thought a throwaway line in the book where he was talking about how MI6 had agents in all of the German insurance companies because the British figured that the Germans knew more about what they were worried about than anybody else, and when you're a business person and you're worried about something, you get insurance on it. And so by seeing what the Germans were going and insuring, they could figure out what they needed to bomb.
Interesting. There's better data for you.
Right, and it was just the idea that in one sentence he said that MI6 had agents in every German insurance company. It's one sentence in the whole book, and I read that and I thought, well, how many other intelligence agencies have people in insurance companies? And I was thinking, all of them.
It's a lot more fun than insurance.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I mean, when you start to look at everything, though, like everything from Catholic confession to insurance companies as what the potential for intelligence is, it starts to kind of be intelligence seems to be the thread that goes through all of the different control mechanisms for all of the institutions on the surface of the planet for as long as we've been alive. It's like the people who know what's going on are the people who are in control of what's going on.
Well, your industry, Peter, and you're in Tracy's industry or former industry with movie making is sort of the same way. If you're putting in a secret pipeline somewhere, what better cover would there be than a big production crew moving all this stuff in?
Well, that was Argo, right?
I'm not familiar with Argo.
Argo, it was the Ben Affleck film about the Iran hostage. They created a film. They created a movie company to help rescue the hostages. Wasn't that part of it? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, there were three hostages. There were three hostages that weren't not in. There were a few. Okay, I'll start again. There were a few hostages that were not inside, that were not captured inside the embassy, but they were in Tehran, and they were in the Canadian embassy. That was it. And in order to get them out of Iran, they created a film company, and they sent the film company someplace to produce the film, and then they snuck the Americans out. I'm going to bring back a name from the past. Who was the Canadian billionaire who was a big part of your shows for the first couple of years? Mineral Resources. He founded Lionsgate, right?
Frank Giustra.
Frank Giustra Partners. Frank Giustra made lots of movies. Made movies with Dolph Lundgren in Africa, as I remember. You'd think that maybe Frank Giustra was producing a few cover stories.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Giustra was the guy, of course, that kicked off the big Kazakhstan uranium buying spree for Bill Clinton and the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Partners, and being just a front organization for, moving tribes in or trained mercenaries in mining areas, and then denuding the whole area with strip mining of its gold and uranium, and then, well, gosh, let's make a movie. We got some money here, and then Carlos Slim of El Chapo fame down in Mexico is his partner. So you have a perfect partner to launder everything through, and that's the Frank Giustra story. And he's also the guy who runs the Clinton Global Initiative. and has those 14 or 1,100 partners that he can't tell you about. Just can tell you the $1 billion that went through that day.
So you got so I'm just trying to think of who the cover story motion picture production hit list might be. So you've got Bob Evans and Cotton Club, right? That seemed to have some kind of drug intelligence community connections in that film. Canon Films, didn't they make a lot of movies in Africa at one point?
The one, now you mentioned Cotton Club, and you guys are the entertainment gurus, but I think of Sumner Redstone. I read his autobiography, and he somehow was involved with all these mafia types making that film. He was only like 10% slug in the deal, but it's like he's saying it's all mafia that's in here doing this movie. And over again, it's reinvesting this kind of drug money from this Meyer Lansky network we still have. It seems to be the backbone of the industry in Hollywood, save for a couple of, I don't know, you've worked in Hollywood a long time. I think the Nazis still fund the Disney franchise, but you know, there's a Mossad.
The Italians still run the back lot of every studio. Yeah.
The front office seems very Mossad-y. Good Mossad and bad Mossad, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, let's just be...
Yeah. So you've got Mossad in the Black Tower in the front. And then you've got the Italians in the back who keep everybody honest. You know?
Not to smear it with a broad brush, but I mean, there is a lot of organized crime in the movie business, I think.
Right, and that's why I made mention earlier of I look at The Godfather and Goodfellas and The Sopranos as all kind of limited hangouts because they give the Italians credit for everything,
right?
You know, and there were other people involved.
If you just want to take the trilogy of Frank Sinatra introducing Jack Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy to Marilyn Monroe out of the first motion picture unit, right? She was first motion picture unit. Judith Exner, who also ended up killing herself at 23 or whatever, also with Bobby Kennedy and Jack Kennedy, at least Jack Kennedy, first motion picture unit. Supposedly, Dr. Hamamoto says that the father of Adam Schiff is a scriptwriter for first motion picture unit. John Huston, first motion picture unit. Even Ronald Reagan later, first motion picture unit. It's sort of like that's where we get all of our starlets for lures.
I'm not familiar with first motion picture unit. What was?
Oh, it was the Hollywood unit created by the War Department in during the war for propaganda purposes to show us.
And was that what was housed in the U.S. Air Force Lookout Mountain movie studio? Because in Laurel Canyon there was a top secret movie studio that Ronald Reagan and John Wayne used to go to. That is now been turned into a private home. Jared Leto owns it as his home now. It was an Air Force base.
I've heard this story, and that's where I don't know exactly, but it seems like Jack Parsons was kind of feeding that whole thing up there, and this, the whole music thing comes out of that as well with the LSD thing and Joni Mitchell, Mickey Dolenz, and you're just wandering down the streets hearing the echoes in Laurel Canyon of I don't know,
Jim Morrison.
Yeah, all of them. All the intelligence kids were in that.
Stephen Stills.
Yeah. Stephen Stills and
Mama Cass.
Mama Cass was up there. Yeah. So it is a history. It goes right from World War II, I think, in the hills up there. I think you're right with the Lookout Mountain thing, because we had a guy come up, Rick Olson, who had talked a lot about this. It was sort of these kind of secret parties and crazy parties that it was basically spending OSS money, and then after they get the ability to refine LSD, then they decide to do the whole music thing in Laurel Canyon. And that was a company, I think it was Sanofi, the same one who's going to be the big beneficiary of this of this corona thing. So Sanofi Aventis. So it's always the same thing. You know, you don't. That's what's so great about it. Once you figure out the first one, you get the whole thing. And Sanofi, we've been doing a lot of work with on how they had this universal vaccine in 2016. Tim Elephantis, not James Elephantis. And then, you know, Peter Strzok's talking about the insurance policy, and Peter Duke and I have thought, well, was this what we have now with the lockdown? Was that really what Strzok and Elephantis were talking about in 2016? But something wasn't ready.
Right. And, you know, bringing it back to that, and, you know, kind of, this is where we all started, right? We all started with Hillary Clinton's emails. And when Tracy and I were talking about what to do the show about today, we were talking about timing, you know, which is why we started off talking about you and Paul Cottrell 14 months ago, and like, you know, what's the right time? And I was having dinner last night with two directors who are, you know, working guys. And one of the guys said to me, he said, you know, I had a breakthrough a few years ago, which is that everything's made up, you know, and, you know, it's kind of the tagline on my Twitter handle that all news is made up. Some of it is true. And so understanding that news is made up, and that, so you, on one side, you've got the truth and current events and, you know, stuff that's actually happening. And then you have the media, right? Which people have been kind of lured into understanding or believing that that's what's really happening or that's what's true. But you and Paul Cottrell uncovered the Fauci information 14 months ago. And this week it's news. And people will be looking at those emails, but we've never seen the 33,000 emails, the Hillary Clinton emails. And why have we never seen them? And is it because they were talking about Wuhan? Is it because they were talking about, you know, bioweapons? Is it because they were talking about, you know, the Great Reset? I don't know the answer to those questions, but not one reporter has ever asked John Podesta, for example, what he meant by hot dogs or handkerchiefs. You know, there has been no follow-up on any of the details of the Hillary Clinton emails that we do know. And so trying to figure out a way to get these things to break out does become the trick, right? It's like, how do you create a stunt? James O'Keefe is pretty good. He creates stunts, right, in order to force the media to cover what he's revealing.
Well, Tracy worked for James O'Keefe, so she should comment on that.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty easy setup for what he's doing, right? Even now, it's get whistleblowers to come forward. Back in the day, it was go get people to live up to their own book of rules, was one of James's rules, which he stole from Alinsky. So it's when they were out banning the guns. And I can't remember which, there was a paper in North Jersey or Southern New York, right around the Manhattan area, that put out a list of all the gun owners a couple of years ago. So one of the ops that James ran was go knock on the reporters' doors to put this out and be like, will you put this sign in your yard that says, I don't have this is a gun-free home? They wouldn't do it. Anybody that was mouthing off on TV, you know, he knocked on the door of the formerly known former MSNBC personality Torre, which I don't know where that guy is now, but went and visited him.
That's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Right. He got ghosted. He's gone. But we went to his place, knocked on his door. Would you put this sign up? No. Okay. Well, what's the deal? You know? So that's playing up to internet virality right there. Hypocrisy right in your face.
Yeah, I mean, it's good for, you know, it's good for a day, right? Well, everything. I mean, it seems like the shelf life of any good idea is pretty short in the attention span. The firefly attention. I'm sorry, the fruit fly attention span that most people have. Right,
but the callbacks are forever. People still say, you know, Acorn. They call out those older videos of his. And it comes up, and it's just he's stacking proof on top of proof that these people are corrupt as hell, and they lie to you all the time.
Indeed. So, George, now that we've established that you're at least 14 months ahead of what's going on, what do you think the news is going to be next week?
Bitcoin down, down, down. Schwab named interim helper president. Maybe Schwab named UN Relief Commission president for America. So I mean, this really has that kind of, I don't want to say getting pushed into the cattle car feel, but the AOC and the re-education camps and so forth, I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think they're pulling back on that now. But I really do think you're going to see Elizabeth Warren come out with 230, and you are going to have truth commissions, or they're going to be called decency commissions or something of that nature. And they're going to be a list or a board of deciding who is irresponsible. We've decided who can say what. I think that's the big thing.
What about the Fauci emails that got released yesterday? Do you think there'll be any impact, or there'll just be a bunch of outrage by the people who are normally outraged every day anyway, and then nothing will happen?
Well, I think Fauci wrote those with the knowledge that they would be released. It's not like he had some kind of secrecy clause. I want Fauci's BlackBerry that he does the pin messaging, the anonymous pin messaging, right? Not the ones that have the to and the from line, where it's all written out and FOIA can expose it one day. So there's a few things in there about him saying things about masks and so forth, and that's kind of red meat for the alt-right to say, see, I told you said masks weren't, double masks and all this, and it's okay to, it's okay to have sex, but you can't get it that way. All those things he said, the wacky things he said. But it's kind of a diversion, sort of a circus diversion away from this other thing, which is, how did so many people get patents and then get joint ventures and then do promotional things like you would launch a movie in terms of spending promotional budget and then have the thing hit right after that? It was almost like you guys say, a Hollywood release in the way it was timed. You would get all your artists up front, you do all your shooting, you sign all the agreements, then you do your PR for the movie, and then you would go on the road to promote it, and then would be in your local theater.
Right. Production requires planning and time and budgets. And, it's one of the things that kind of drives me crazy about the right, and why I've kind of gotten to a point where I'm resigned to believe that they're not going to ever do anything correctly, and that is that it requires foresight and planning and budgets, and all of those things that you just described represent, in the case of COVID, millions or billions of dollars. As far as think about all the contests and all of the, last week governors are doing lotteries and giving millions of dollars away. All of the different celebrities that are saying, get your jab, all of that stuff requires a lot of wrangling. And, one of my most popular tweets last week is, as Bitcoin was taking its dive, I posted a picture, because people don't correlate these things, but Bitcoin started taking off before the election. And I looked at it taking off and I was thinking, oh, they're paying people to fix the election. This is just the way my brain is working. And at some point, those people are going to want to go buy their G6. And so they're going to sell their Bitcoin. And so I think of it as the pig going through the python, right? So all of that stuff takes production. And I'm rambling a little bit, but on one side, they not only know how much it's going to cost and who's going to do the job, but they've got all the money laundering figured out, so that nobody gets caught. And on the other side, they're waving around a 250-year-old piece of parchment going, this is going to protect me.
I've watched a lot of your guys' shows about that. And you always make a big show and like, ha, 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 look at this. So I've enjoyed that when you guys have parodied the value of the Constitution as itself.
I think it's a great idea, the Constitution. I just don't think, I don't think that I don't think it is the mechanism that is used to rule us. There are other mechanisms that are being used to rule us, primarily fear and intimidation, and media. And the Constitution is the kind of like the fairy dust of sugar that they sprinkle on top of things in order to make you accept it. It's the spoonful of sugar, right?
Well, I think there's a tremendous power to, Steve Jobs used to say, if you want to predict the future, invent it. And I think you folks in the creative arts have this kind of power. I guess I'm kind of bleeding over into the creative arts now with the books, but you guys have the power to do these narratives where, like Wizard of Oz is sort of one of those things where, hey, everything's going real bad. And then Toto pulls the curtain. And then everybody realizes that it's a small cabal that could be easily put to the side. And there is a kind of a silver lining in these stories. And these stories, Peter is the one who was talking with Dr. Hamamoto, saying somewhere under the rainbow. We just have to think of it from the midget's point of view. And I know Tracy has worked with midgets.
It's true. Should I call them and get their take on what's going on? Maybe they have a better perspective than we do on this.
That would be a good show.
A great series. Can you imagine midgets' take on everything? I mean, it would be great.
Can you imagine? We should get George and the midgets. We could get Sammy the dwarf. I know Sammy the dwarf.
There you go.
If Tracy described these Velcro jumpsuits that the midgets wore, and then in a Velcro room, and they were throwing the midgets and they were sticking, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm tuned in right there. You got my attention about the next thing the midget says.
Well, maybe that's what you need in the background, and then the you can do your news in front of that.
Yeah, I mean, headline: one midget goes.
Yeah.
Headline 2, boom, the second midget. No one else would have that.
No.
Nobody. And throw a cruise in, and now you got a midget cruise.
I'll reach out.
So it's funny. So I wanted to continue the midget theme here, but Infidel Apostate says the purged videos of Peter, Tracy, and George. Is that because we were on George's show that they were purged? Okay, that's why they're purged.
I think
so.
Okay. No, going back to midgets, I was thinking about what the genius of Hunter S. Thompson, right? Because that was a big part of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, I think, or Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail. I can't remember which one.
Las Vegas. There weren't midgets on the Campaign Trail in '72.
Yeah. But that was kind of a stunt to include them in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't have pictures or video, you're talking about them, and it's untoward and impolitic and all those other things, which makes it newsworthy, right? So, George, maybe you should go find some midgets.
Well, Tracy's got my midget connection, and I think it's going to be a huge show. Also, Fear and Loathing on the Las Vegas, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is where Johnny Depp learned to implode his plosives. I think we should go over there, right?
I liked the Bill Murray. I like the Bill Murray version better.
He didn't do the same movie though. He did Wear the Buffalo Roam, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. You liked his Hunter S. Thompson better.
I like his Hunter S. Thompson better. Yeah.
But see, the fun part about these talk shows is we don't have to. We can have a budget of 0 and create these mental pictures and almost little mini dramas here. I think we have a lot of people on the edge of their seat wondering when the next midget's going to be thrown here. And then we've got Hunter S. Thompson, and you see that Cadillac going to Las Vegas and the dust cloud, and here they're going, no, don't stop at the casino, and there's a guy who's going to shoot you. And these are all the devices that Peter Duke taught me in storytelling. Got to have some suspense in there, and there's got to be comic relief, and there has to be recapitulation of what you know and what the hero knows before he can do the next great feat, all these things. And so I'm going to throw it back on you. You are the storytellers that can define what our future will be.
Well, with that, Maybe we should tell everybody to like and subscribe. We've
There you go.
no, I think you're right, George. And when you're right, you're right. So I think about it a lot. It's this morning when I was reading the Fauci email, somebody American So Woke, who is one of my Twitter followers and friends, he tweeted out, it's not Fauci that I want to go after. I want to find out who Fauci's working for, which I thought was great. And I think that a while back, I thought, if the bad guys ever get caught in this, we're not going to have the Nuremberg trials. We're going to have the Gettysburg trials, right?
Oh.
And there was a famous film about the Nuremberg trials that was called Judgment at Nuremberg. And I tweeted out this morning that somebody should start writing Judgment at Gettysburg, and kind of figure out who the Himmler and Goering and Goebbels of 2020 are, for the trial at Gettysburg that we have to have.
I like it. I can see it now. We have Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain there up on the little round top, and those are us, the good guys. And then we got the Fauci cabal down at the bottom of the rock.
I actually have Gettysburg contacts too. I know some people at Gettysburg.
You know somebody everywhere. One of the great things about going to dinner with Peter is you say something and he knows who bought it, who did the movie, the 5 people who got cut that could have gotten the movie. It's really fun because it's kind of like playing Trivial Pursuit, but you don't have to wait for the cards to flip over. It just it's so much fun. And Tracy's the same way. Yeah, when we did those shows, just all the different movies you worked on, it's so much fun, and all the different directors and actors.
But you do the same thing for history, George.
I try, it's all those books, I was the one guy who took the summer reading list seriously. Remember when your 8th grade teacher used to give you that list of 100, you should have to have and to have not done by the Cubs playing their, 15th game.
Right.
And, Wuthering Heights really before the All-Star break, and I was actually reading those books. So there you have it.
It's interesting, too, because I had dinner with my brother last week, and my brother, he's got a PhD in education, but his bachelor's degree was in history. And we were talking about history and research, and he said it's interesting because the farther back in time that you go, the less factual everything is, because the less information that you've got, right? And if you go back far enough, there's a single source, right, that everybody else is referencing. And we kind of have the inverse problem at this point, because when you start to get into revisionist history or alternate history, whatever you call the stories that we trade in, there's a huge amount of information. There's whistleblowers right and left, people who are saying, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened. And there's 50 books on something. And it's surprising to me at this point that, and maybe it's just because there are so many sources that there isn't an authority. There isn't a Herodotus or a Plato, right? You've got this entire myriad of sources, but when 80% of them are all saying the same thing, and none of that is what's winding up showing on the magic rectangle in somebody's living room or in their hand, then you have to start to ask yourself the question, why not?
Well, there isn't a Herodotus or a Thucydides or whoever. I think Herodotus was a historian, Thucydides was a playwright. But anyway, but we do have the internic. The internic is who gives out IP addresses. And the reason why I get lucky and get it right a lot is because I don't listen to what people's accounts and stories are. I try to go to the IP addresses. So if Adam Schiff is talking to 2 guys named Parnas and Fruman, and they're communicating with a billionaire in Ukraine named Kolomoisky, and you publish their communications IP addresses in your books, people can go check those out. And now, if you're Adam Schiff and you're running a op like to impeach the president, you know that evidence exists. You know it's going to be introduced in defense. Hey, what were you doing? You're supposed to have this wall, this Great Wall of China between you and the witnesses, and we've got you communicating like nobody's business, like a bookie joint, going back and forth. So what's the story? So I think there's this new technically informed reporting that is really changing the game and cutting through some of the cacophony. And I also think, Chris, the IP hunter, and some people like that who are really bringing up in the game here. So hopefully people will be building their base on this factual metadata going forward. And there will be hope for us all. I feel a song coming on.
I don't know. I'm conflicted about the word hope. It's caused a lot of trouble in the last 3 years. Yeah.
Wow. There's a book there, a book called Hope, or a concept called Hope.
I mean, Eric Hoffer wrote about it. Bill Clinton was the man from a town called Hope, and Barack Obama was Mr. Hope and Change. So hope is what, I mean, the way that I look at it is hope is what you have when you have nothing else. Like if you're done and you've exhausted all of your ability to change whatever the situation is that you're in, then you're left with hope. But people, reverting to hope without taking action winds up becoming a giant problem, I think. And that's why I look at things like QAnon and anything, any of the populists out there, the Bannons who are, banging the drum and getting people all wound up and saying, just wait until next week when this thing happens. It's the waiting till next week that's the problem. Like, people should stop waiting. They should just start doing things.
Well, you mentioned Hoffer, and I think you're referencing True Believer there, and self-organizing teams, and you would love a world where all the citizen journalism folks ran out into the street, and they kind of go into one of those thriller break dances where they're all coordinated, they all work together, and like a Michael Jackson video, and we're all pushing toward the same goal, truth. And
I want to meet the person who came up with and executed the Dancing Doctors videos. Okay, because whoever they were really good at what they did, and they deserved the G6 they're flying around in, because they were really good at it.
Wow. Yeah, I remember. What are you guys doing? Supposed to be people dying left and right. You guys are dancing, and you've been trained. Yeah,
it was almost Monty Python.
Yeah.
It
was a little disturbing that there was so many people involved in these productions, but I've tried my crack at this, a dozen or so times, trying to do these self-organizing teams, because teams are better than individuals, and teams are going to be cross-checked, and teams are going to have all this inbuilt credibility, because they're going to vet everything and all that. And it's hard, because you're going up against people who have a military backing and military planning, and these think tanks have rolled
and a military budget.
So that's why I say I'll take this moment to talk about Patreon. And it's important to support the artists that you believe in. And please do have hope when you give Peter and Tracy their due in Patreon.
Well, we're not on Patreon. We're on Locals.
Yes, we are.
We're on Locals.
Oh, tell me about that.
Tracy can talk about it. Tracy's
it's like
the one.
monetized Facebook, right? So it's like a Facebook private group that everybody can join our channel and chat amongst ourselves, and they can support the show.
Or George could start a channel.
Good.
And then you post your exclusive content on there for people who support your channel, and they pay you.
And it's a Facebook app. Is that what you're
No,
saying?
no, it's Facebook-esque. It's kind of like you have a feed in the middle. You can share videos, and they're going to add live streaming to it in the next couple months.
And it's called Locals, like you would spell.
Locals, yes. It was started by Dave Rubin, and I think Scott Adams has something to do with it, and Patrick Byrne has something to do with it. Yeah, locals.com.
Yeah.
That's neat. I'm getting a lot of requests to go to this event down in Florida, in Tampa, called Thrive Time. Familiar with this gentleman named Clark? There's a group, kind of a cadre: Lindell, Mike Flynn, Patrick Byrne. I don't know, a couple of Judy Mikovits sometimes, if it's about the coronavirus. And it's kind of like a minstrel show. They're in Wisconsin one week, and then they're over here the next, and it's kind of the Patriot parade, if you will. And I don't know if the value of that is, but they seem to get all the kind of the alt-right attention when they do these things. They just had one in Dallas with Mike Flynn over the Memorial Day weekend. They had one in Oklahoma before that.
Where Mike Flynn said that he agreed that there should be a Myanmar-style coup in the United States, and then he walked it back the next day.
Yeah. I think these are fun just for the 360s that you get to, the wheelies that you can see in the parking lot. I think it's one of those, truth is what I say it to mean, nothing more, nothing less, right? So we're all Mad Hatters in a way, but maybe that was Humpty Dumpty that said that. But anyway, I do think that you should support Tracy and Peter by joining their Locals group. That I do know.
And I think we should get George on Locals.
We should get George on Locals.
The plug won't be pulled again.
Yes.
Ooh, I like that. Oh, this is the enclave. This is the secure enclave that we've been looking for.
It may be.
It may be.
Yeah. Maybe.
Anyway, so with that, do we have any other questions?
I have some questions for you.
All right.
I want, this is going to be just me as a dumb screenwriter going to a Hollywood creativity party. No drugs involved. Okay. And I'm taking it to you guys. You accomplished screenwriters, realization, creative director, photography, directors of photography, all the things you are in one person, Tracy and Peter. What if this was a movie? Okay, if the last 4 years, let's say, from the Hillary emails that you mentioned is kind of a good signpost to now, through January 6th to now, what movie would you think that would be? What movie would kind of be closest to that?
You mean of a movie that's already been made?
Or a movie that you can describe, and maybe you can put a new title out there if you want to put a new title.
Well, I don't know if this is the answer to your question, but I was thinking a lot about the movie American Made the last couple of days. Because that movie is a great movie. It's got Tom Cruise in it. Okay? People died making that movie. And people still don't know the Mena, Arkansas story. Like, they made a whole $200 million feature film about it with one of the top 10 movie stars in the world. And people are still going, George W. Bush, yay. Or George Herbert Walker Bush, yay. It's like, no, not yay. Like, crime family. Like, what's going on? So, so the question, again, you wanted to know what the movie is for the last 4 years. I'm looking at a really, really well-made movie that had a giant budget that still didn't seem to move the needle 1 degree towards, maybe it did, but, and, oh yeah, by the way, sidebar, the best sex scene in any movie ever made, but you have to go watch the movie to see what I'm talking about. It involved stunts and flying.
Wow.
And I believe that Tom Cruise was doing the stunts and the flying.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know there's Kirsten Dunst with the upside down kiss with Toby.
No, this is way better than that. This is way better.
Better than that?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, this is exciting. Well, Tracy, what do you think?
I think we got to bring you back on to talk about it because I got other ideas for you.
Okay. Well, that sounds good too. All right. Well, we'll do it in another session then, I guess. I don't mean to. I was having fun there for a second, but anyway. Well, I just wanted to throw I wanted to throw on the road to the Wizard of Oz here out as a potential way, not to give false hope, but that the Klaus Schwabian Wicked Witch can be killed if you figure out what's the magic potion, the water. You throw the water, right? So
here's a thought that I had to answer your question. Aristotle said that history is harder than fiction because when you're telling history, you have to kind of more or less stick to the facts, right? But if you're writing a drama, a fictitious drama, you can. He said that plot and character are only devices that you use in order to get to the end, right? And so one of the ideas that I've had in the last couple of days is, and it would be a Black Mirror-like construct where every episode would be about the same thing, but it would be different people in different situations. And that is that if you assume for a second that the way that the secret societies work is that they look for people who are excellent at a particular discipline, and when they get to a peak, they approach them with either money, ideology, compromise, or ego in order to get them initiated, into the secret society. That if you did a series where in each episode each week you saw somebody who had reached a peak at a particular discipline and what their vector was, like how they got sucked in and whether or not they chose to go in or not go in. You could do a whole series of stories about all of the different ways that happened. And I think that if we go back and we take a look at all of the research that we've done, there's probably dozens of examples of people. This guy did it for the money. This guy did it for the ideology. This guy liked the Bada Bing girls. This guy, had his girlfriend got an abortion. It depends on what year you're in, obviously, for context. But there's all kinds of different ways that people wind up getting compromised, and then they get sucked in to this kind of insidious eyeball, at the top of the dollar bill, whatever it is.
Wow. That was awesome. Temptation in the mirror. Wow. Doesn't that sound incredible? Each week is kind of this self-reflective, morality play. I love it. This is going to be great.
Right. But that would be that might be a more successful way to get people to wake up to what's going on than, showing them a literal history of something.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I tried to do something like that with Let's Call Him Macduff about the FBI agent with the choice, but I see what you're saying is once you go into fiction, you can have all these kind of.
Well, yeah, you could say, well, yeah, it was really this guy over there that did that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine these two characters and turn it into this story. And because it's fiction, then I don't need to worry about reconciling that with history.
Oh, the old composite character flaw. I love it.
Yeah. So that's just my off the top of the head thought.
I can't wait. Well, here's my promise to you. Tracy invited me to join locals, and I'm not walking. I'm rushing out the door. Wait, it's the computer's right here. I'm going to join up right as soon as this is over. And I want to, if there's any George Webb folks out there that are in here, I think we share a big chunk of our audience. Sign up, please. And maybe this will be our new secret clubhouse.
Right. Well, we still do have a Twitter and a Instagram and a Telegram, and so as soon as you set that up, George, we'll push that out there.
Oh, I love it. Okay, I do have a Telegram now, so I feel like I've joined the 21st century. But this locals thing seems like a very speakeasy feel to it here. I like
It
the way
does.
it's presented. So this is going to be good. Well, join Peter and Tracy doing their thing. And gosh, it was so great talking with you guys this afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you
We'll-
for your time.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again. Thank you.
You're welcome.